Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and today I have with me Rachel Allen,
Hi, guys.
who has been on pretty regularly for a year or so,
Yeah.
at least monthly, I think,
Yeah.
as often as we can get it scheduled. Not as
Yeah.
often as you and I have conversations, but as often as we can get a recording scheduled.
Right.
So today we wanted to talk about the impact of, I think they're called the large corporate mental health platforms. At least that's what I've heard them called. So we're talking about BetterHelp, Talkspace. I know there used to be some other ones, but I don't know if the other ones are still going.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember what some of the other ones were.
One that I think was Cerebral.
Yeah.
I don't think that one's still up and going that I am aware of.
Yeah. I mean, the two dominant ones are Talkspace and BetterHelp.
BetterHelp. Yeah.
And I think that there might be some smaller ones, but those are the two dominating the platform right now.
I think I hear ads for BetterHelp on pretty much every podcast I listen to, which makes me crazy.
Especially the therapist podcast. Those always get me a little bit.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
really?
Well, and some of them I'm like, do you really use Talkspace or BetterHelp? You really do. I'm sure you're making money. Really, you're getting what you need from BetterHelp. Okay. So particularly we want to talk about how these large corporate platforms are impacting the mental health field, and the field of therapy in general. There are I think, some pros. There's a lot of cons, I think, for clients as well as the therapists who are working with these platforms. And so we'll get into all of that today, discussing these platforms that have come into existence over the past. Were they going before COVID, or have?
I would say probably like the last probably 8 years they've existed or like been in the been in the space, but I would say after COVID is when they kind of took off.
Yes. Yeah. Or during COVID, I think they took off when in the therapy field, we were working remotely as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, everybody was working remotely. So I think it became a really easy thing for them.
yeah. And then I think because of the pandemic, there's just been a rapid growth in popularity due to the accessibility, the convenience, and affordability. There is a sliding scale according to how much income you make. But at the higher tier, depending on what the therapists in your area charge, you're not saving that much money. But they have had a lot of growth. I think part of that too is, I don't even know what their marketing budget is. I'm sure they can spend $1 million or more on marketing.
Yeah.
And, that's very helpful in today's world to get out those platforms.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I've had people ask, would I recommend it? And it's really interesting, especially the ethical questions around it.
Yeah. We'll get there. Let's not start the ethical place, but we will get to the ethics of using the platforms both for therapists as well as for clients. So let's talk about the business model for corporate therapy platforms. I think one of their business models is they're these tech first platforms that will match clients with therapists through their apps or their websites.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how good the match is. A lot of the commercials that I hear on podcasts will say, if you don't like your therapist, you can switch. It's not a big deal. It's like you're like next, which makes sense to me with that tech first platform. It seems like they're trying to model it after dating apps. In my opinion, I don't know if that's accurate. I haven't been on those platforms. I haven't been on dating apps either because I didn't have a need for it. But it seems to, as I've done some studying and looking into these, it seems to be modeled after some of the dating apps.
Yeah. I mean, so I've played around. Well, I played around with Talkspace. I haven't been on BetterHelp, but I played around with Talkspace to kind of see how it matches and who it matches you with. And it is like you put in things that you're looking for, and they match
Hmm.
you with therapists that specialize in that, specialize being air quotes.
Right. Because they're not actually vetting their therapists for these certifications or these specialties.
No, at least they weren't when I was on there, right?
I don't believe they still are vetting the therapist for that. So the therapist can say, I'm trained in whatever, and there's no vetting process.
So yeah, so it is a little bit like a dating app, like things that you're interested in, things that you are hoping to achieve. If I remember correctly, modalities was one of those, which I thought was really interesting because as clinicians in an office, we don't really let our clients dictate our modalities.
I don't
We're
always
going
talk to
to
my clients about modalities.
Right. And most clients don't have a clue, right? Like
Hmm.
CBD is pretty common, EMDR is pretty common. So you'll get those buzz modalities, but other than
Hmm.
that, like most of them don't know what all you could be trained in, where those theories come from, right? Like that's
Hmm.
also that we learn in grad school. And so asking a client up front, like, what modality do you want me to use? That seems very I don't know, it feels very um like leading the client a little bit.
Well,
Um
and putting some of that responsibility on the client. I mean,
mm,
most clients don't even know what the letters behind a therapist's name mean.
right.
And so to ask them what modality they're looking for, again, I think that's complex. They don't know. This isn't their area of specialty. It's the therapist
Right.
specialty. So they may have heard, like you were saying, they may have heard of buzzwords. But even EMDR, I would say I was trained in EMDR while Francine Shapiro was still alive. And in a lot of the trainings that I've done, if the founder of the modality is still living, um, and we went through this with ITAP that trains all CSATs. When I
Hmm.
was first part of the ITAP community, I don't know that they were as rigid as some of the other trainings that I've been a part of, where it's like they want to grow, but they also want to keep tight control of the training, which I understand because they want to have this pure model that is used correctly, that it's used the way that it's intended to use, and there's not therapist error in how that is used. So they're wanting to grow this and make it more accessible to more clinicians and therefore clients, while also trying to maintain some tight control over it. And I I've gone through that with several different certification communities I'm part of, and then the founder passes away, and it kind of just goes in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
And you can get training in EMDR on PESI, which is I mean, it has information about EMDR. I wouldn't say that qualifies you as an EMDR practitioner. So again, clients are not going to know this. And sometimes therapists aren't aware that, this training in this way is not the same as, taking the official training.
Yeah, and getting certified. Yeah.
Yeah, because usually with certification, there is some consultation that you're doing in addition to just the training so that you're also learning how to actually integrate it into your therapy practice.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that this is kind of a side tangent in terms of certifications, but when to get certified as a CSAT, you do 4 mods and 30 hours of supervision
A
and
minimum of 30.
a minimum of 30, right? And 15 years in, if I have a case, like I will seek out supervision or I will seek
Mm-hmm.
out consultation, right? And so that's what the certifications afford you,
Mm-hmm.
that extended community and extended consultation and being able to question other practitioners,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where like these trainings for CEUs done by PESI or like they're just scratching the surface of what could be and to get you more information to see if you would want to certify in that, so that you're not paying a huge amount for the
Mm-hmm.
certification and then not using it. And that's
Right.
kind of what it's created for. But that is not how many clinicians use it or even like, these platforms you can take a PESI course and then say, I'm trained in EMDR. Well,
Right.
you're not certified. Right?
Yeah.
There's some difference there.
Yeah. Which is not being vetted, as I've said. So that's one of the concerns or complications with clients not really being informed as to what they're getting when they go on those platforms looking for help. It's also usually a monthly or subscription based platform. So depending on their income and depending on the platform, they're paying as little as $30 a week. It's usually a weekly subscription.
Mm-hmm.
So $30 a week to $140 a week. That's a pretty big range depending on your income. And with that, you get, I think, one live session with a therapist. So like video or phone call or text. I think they include text. Then you get a couple of other text messages that you can exchange with a therapist during that week. And then I have read too that therapists have certain expectations when clients are texting. Their pay is based on getting back to them in a timely manner, and the platform defines what that timely manner is. And I know a couple of years ago when I watched a thing John Oliver was doing on these platforms, he was talking about how some of the platforms want therapists using as few of words as possible in their text communication with clients, and they were penalized for doing too many words. Other platforms encourage therapists to use more words. And a lot of therapists are on multiple platforms. So keeping that straight, which to me, neither of those is actually beneficial to the client. The fewer words as possible, more words that you get paid per word, that's not really beneficial to the client. It might be beneficial to the therapist to use more words on that platform.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like a catch-22. And I think my struggle with that is we have done sliding scale at our office. We're like people who need to go pro bono or something like that. Like because they're having financial hardship.
Lost a job, something like that. Yeah.
We will work with that. And that's a very human thing, right? Like they've been working with us for a while, something's happened, we adjust to make that work. I think one of my issues with the whole platform subscription thing is the expectation that if you have more money, you get more access. And essentially are getting better therapy. I don't know that therapists see that, but that is the platform, like that is the subscription format, right? Like if you need more, if you want more, you have to pay this. Where I don't feel like as a clinician in our clinic, that's distinguished between how I work.
Right.
My
I mean, we will, if we're getting clients who are discharging from a residential program, that's a big step down to go from residential 24/7 to once a week. So we'll usually try to get them in twice a week, a group session, to try to help scale it in a way that is still feeling like it's less than what residential was, but they're not dropped off a cliff.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing too, right? My clients who I've had to work out payment plans or I do have to see twice a week, they're getting the best of me in every session.
Right. Our pro bono clients are not getting less than our full fee clients or vice versa. Yeah.
And I mean, the subscription format, the way that they have it set up, that's what's happening. If you can afford more, you get better. And I don't like that. I don't think that is always beneficial to the client. Also, right, there is this human, like when we get to see our clients, when we get to like even online, and I know the platforms do online, but there is a level of getting to know them and understand them and kind of understand the crisis that they're in. And not always presenting problem is the thing that we actually have to work on, right? Like it's just the presenting problem. We get that
Right.
stable, like we have other stuff to work on. But I do think that the platforms are created for short term.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're right. They're created for triage in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
They're not advertised as crisis care. Um,
Mhm.
and just when you were saying they're kind of designed for if you can pay more, you get more from the therapist. From my reading, a lot of therapists who use these platforms, who are on these platforms, they mostly have to be licensed. So they're not a new graduate. They've had to have gotten supervision because once a therapist graduates, they have the degree. But in order to be fully licensed, they have to do so many hours of supervision. And that varies from state to state how many hours that requires. Under a licensed supervisor, in order to get their full license, and they have to pass a test.
Mhm.
So that's how a therapist would become fully licensed. From what I was looking at, all of these platforms require you to be fully licensed, which is probably a good thing, I would say. Um, but for these therapists, if they're, let's say they just barely get licensed and they go work on these platforms, I mean, that's still a newish therapist.
Mhm.
And there's not a lot of oversight, or therapists on these platforms are 1099 employees, so they're not W-2. So the platform itself isn't having to pay employment tax, which in the field, the Department of Labor is moving away more and more. My understanding is they're moving away more and more from allowing therapists to be 1099 employees at a group practice. The thinking used to be if they had a different form of income. So maybe they're working, I'll take, for example, they're working at Healing Pass part-time, and I would have them as a 1099, meaning I don't have to pay employment taxes. I don't have to withhold any taxes. It's cheaper for the group practice to run 1099 employees. Um, but they have to get, in order to meet that qualification, according to tax outlines, they would have to have another source of income, not a small source of income that matches what they're getting from the group practice. And the way that I've seen that it has evolved is if they're a therapist and they're working at multiple places as a therapist, that is seen as the same type of income. And so the Department of Labor has been urging to move more towards practices need to hire them as W-2s. And we've mostly used W-2s just because my accountant has always said they're not qualified for a 1099. I know a lot of practices do that because it's less expensive overhead for the practice. And there's a lot of things that, I wonder, how do they get away with that? Is the therapist, I guess they're somewhat independent, although they're required to be on the platform to get their caseloads filled.
Mhm. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that originally how it was pitched was these are therapists who work in their own practice, they're doing their own stuff, and this is a platform that connects you to them, right?
Like
So
you
it
could get your own clients, but you can also work with these platforms. Yeah. I still
um
think that doesn't meet what the Department of Labor's expectations are.
right, but I think that that was how it was spun in the beginning. That is not how it works now, right? You can have your own clients outside of BetterHelp and Talkspace and all of that, like you can do that, but you can't. I don't think that it's possible to take someone off the platform into a private practice. I mean,
Correct.
maybe it, I feel like that would be,
The expectation is that you don't. Yeah.
yeah,
Again, how much are they vetting that? I don't know.
right. But yeah, I have struggled with the financial structure of it from the beginning. And I think that part of the reason is you're paying $30 a week. Like say you're getting the base plan paying $30 a week. Not all of that's going to the therapist.
No, no,
In fact, the contract for the therapist is really small
right.
compared to what you're paying, which then requires the therapist to have to work more. And I can't remember when I looked it up. This has been a while ago, but when I looked it up, it was it equaled out to be about like $10 an hour, which
Mm.
for someone who has a master's degree and certifications, you can make more than that at McDonald's, right? It doesn't make sense if everybody is doing the $30. Now, granted, that's why they have the tiered thing
Right.
to offset that.
From what I've found, therapists are getting $30 to $70 per session. But again, at the higher rate, if the client's paying 140, that's, 50% of that session. Usually it's less than 50%. From what I was reading, therapists are not even getting 50% of the session fee.
Which is, I think that's really hard. And I think it's really hard if the therapist is, if this is their sole income, they're taking on a lot of clients.
Right. Yes. Which another way their business model is structured is there's an emphasis on scalability. So they want to be able to grow big, which means therapists are having a higher caseload number that they have to see. They want to make it much more automated so that they can have low overhead.
Yeah. Which I think is the text message stuff. And you and I don't have whole sessions via text, but that is, yeah, ever. Like, I mean, I will text clients if they have a question or emergency or a question about the homework or something like that. That does happen, but like, I don't spend an hour texting a client. Just asking questions, having them reply, asking questions, having them reply. And so I think that that's again, it's the quantity versus quality question. I don't know that we're getting quality care because therapists are having to make a living on these platforms.
And most of these platforms don't accept insurance.
Right.
There are, I think Talkspace, I don't think BetterHelp does at all. Talkspace does, but they work with Cigna or Optum, which aren't known to be the highest reimbursing insurance companies. So what the insurance is reimbursing, you're getting a percentage of what the insurance pays for that session, which again, those are some lower reimbursing insurances. And we've seen this even practices where they are paneled with most insurance companies. For therapists to make a good wage, they're usually required to see a lot of clients because insurance reimburses at a lower rate, depending on the insurance. I mean, they're always lower rate than a private fee, but there are a few that will reimburse a little more decent. And there's some that reimburse at really low insulting rates. And so if you're a therapist working at one of these practices and you can get a client whose insurance is any of them, you're going to have to see more clients in order to make the money you would want to make.
Right. So, I mean, that's like yeah. It's one of those things that I don't necessarily disagree with. Like, and I think that telehealth has revolutionized therapy, right? Like you and I see people in communities that wouldn't have access to therapy otherwise.
Right.
And I do think that like telehealth and that kind of thing has created a lot of accessibility for people.
Right.
But I also see this a lot in our industry in terms of like something that is really, really good be used in predatory ways. And in some ways, like Talkspace and BetterHelp does feel predatory to me because they are going for the people who do need help, who know that they need help, for whatever reason, have anxiety to seek out a therapist in their area or seek out it becomes a like, well, this is easy and probably not exactly what the client needs, but it's easy.
Yeah.
And the thought process around that is right. Any access is better than no access. And I don't know that that is the way that we should be treating this.
Right.
Right. I think quality access, regardless of where you're at, is important. And these platforms really are feeding on a generation that is used to doing everything online, that's not used to human interaction at all, which I think,
Mm-hmm.
again, you know, some of the stuff that we do in therapy is relational. It requires human interaction. It requires us to show up in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In one of the we were at ITAP symposium a couple weekends ago, and trying to remember which breakout session it was in. I think it was the one that was talking about benefits to online therapy. And the presenter, was saying there are some drawbacks, there are some pluses. For some clients, that's just what they're going to need. And he's from the UK, and so it's different over there. Licensing is different in other countries than it is in the US. But I think it was in that breakout session, and he was talking about last year, so in 2024, the number one use of Chat GPT or some of these other AI platforms was for help with technology. And so far in 2020, it is for therapy help. Mental
2020.
health. Yeah, 2025, it's for mental health help and therapy help, which to me, yeah, AI will compete with some of these platforms. I don't know that a therapist in a private practice, I see some of these fears in groups that are online for group practice owners. I see some of these fears of AI, or when their phone calls, their intake line is slower, they're more likely to say, I think it's because of BetterHelp, or I think it's because of AI. And I don't know that, I mean, sure, they're taking some of the clients. I don't know if those clients would have eventually gone to a private practice or a group practice to see a therapist. Sometimes we have gotten clients at our practice who initially started with BetterHelp and then came to our practice. So sometimes it is that gateway where we don't have any clinicians who are working with those platforms, but they felt some comfort or ease with using that platform before coming to a private practice. But yeah, if your skills aren't there, if you're nervous to be in the room with a client and don't know how to address some of those things, then yeah, it's a little easier to hide behind the screen for both the client and the therapist. And I think both AI and these platforms can compete with those therapists. One of the not hidden secrets in the field is not all therapists are the same. Like, not all therapists are good therapists.
Yeah.
Not all therapists are ethical therapists.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the TV shows that have come out in the last, I don't know, 5 years that have had a lot of unethical mental health practices.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think the ethics of it really does come into play, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, not all therapists are created equal. And to be fair, right? Like your therapists who are really good therapists
Mm-hmm.
are going to struggle on platforms like that because it's
Right.
not the kind of therapy that they want to do,
Right.
right? It's not this deep, integrative, relational healing therapy. So those therapists are always going to work in private practice. They're never going to be on platforms like this because
Mm-hmm.
you can't, like, it would just feel like you're beating your head against the wall.
Well, you don't
Much
have
screen.
that level of emotional bandwidth as a human being.
Right.
The number of clients required to see, whether that's being paneled with all the insurance companies or being on one of these platforms to make the living that you want, you're going to have to see more clients. And, then we start to question, what is the bandwidth of that therapist to see that many clients in a week?
Right.
Sometimes we're talking 40, 50 clients in a week to get what they want to be making. And that's a lot of clients to do that type of work with, the type of work where you were talking about that deep interpersonal, integrative type of therapy. That we only have so much bandwidth for as therapists.
I mean, you and I have talked about this, right? Like we have a limit on the amount of clients that we allow therapists to see in our office per week.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have a minimum and a maximum because
Mm-hmm.
after that maximum, it's exhausting.
Right.
And you and I have talked, the times that we've had to see clients, I've had a couple of times that I've had to see over that amount. And by the end of the week, I'm tapped. I'm
Mm-hmm.
exhausted emotionally, and I don't have a lot of bandwidth for my own family or myself at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And right, and I only do that, once every blue moon if we have to go to a conference or if we, like if I'm
Right.
trying to get clients in so that they don't lose continuation of care. Um, but there's no way I would be able to do that effectively week
Right.
after.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that sweet spot is clients a week, just so people have a reference of what we're talking about. That sweet spot to be able to do that type of work would be around 25 clients a week. I would
yeah.
say the upper tier that I don't encourage people to go past is 27. I had a couple of weeks ago, I saw 26 clients in a week. It was a lot, but I
Mhm.
don't typically see 26 clients in a week. I usually see somewhere 22 to 25.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it's two more clients, but it's two more clients.
Right.
And you don't want to have that, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, you're coming home and I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to have to connect. I don't want to have to feel what you're feeling. Yeah, that's going to affect your personal life if that's the rate of work that you're required to do ongoing.
Or you have to lower your level of care and
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's what we actually see therapists do is they can't work at that capacity week in and week out. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we're looking at these platforms that require a lot of clients, like you're going to struggle with keeping that effective. Also,
Mm-hmm.
just the paperwork, right? This is the
Right.
other thing that we typically don't talk about in general. And I'm assuming because it's a mental health field that you're required to carry notes. So even on a platform like BetterHelp or Talkspace, they're having to document all of that on the back end.
Well, Rachel, you're not aware of the AI note takers that are available.
I mean, I am aware of that.
That you have no documentation effort on the back end.
Yeah, which I mean, okay, and if everything's in text, you can have something surmise the text messages, whatever. But any kind of talk therapy,
No, they're recording the session and
yeah,
then deleting it after they create the note.
yeah,
So talk therapy is being documented and your notes are done at the end of that if you're using AI note takers.
right.
Those are
Which,
fairly new. And so, again, ethical standards, keeping up with technology is always a problem.
yeah,
There's
I was about to
always
say,
that disconnect in timing. But I think, again, if they're trying to cut back on overhead, if they want to make sure their clinicians are getting notes done, which is always something that every therapist is always like, notes, notes, notes. I got a note.
the documentation is awful.
Right.
And it's the least favorite part of my job
Right. Yes.
is notes, right? I would rather read through my supervision notes than have to write my own notes.
Right.
But I also think this is one of those things that we run against HIPAA compliancy.
Mm-hmm.
And BetterHelp has had issues with HIPAA compliancy
Right.
because part of their platform was, I don't know, I think that they have fixed this now, but like I remember, I think it was in 2020. I think it was in 2020 that they had the realization that they were releasing people's like,
They were selling people's private
yes,
information. Yeah.
selling people's private information for ads and stuff like that,
Uh-huh.
which broke
As
the
corporations do.
right. And I don't actually know how that got fixed because,
Or if it did.
or if it did, right? But that's another issue. We can't, as therapists, we can't even solicit like, hey, can you give us a good review? Because that
Right.
broke HIPAA compliancy.
Right.
Right? Like, we can't do that. And for BetterHelp to have testimonials or for BetterHelp
Mhm.
to be able to get ads and things like that, or to tailor what's coming up in your news feeds and um social media feeds. Like again, I question the HIPAA compliancy on that because ours is so tampered down, right? Like
Hmm.
like what we have to do and how we have to respect the client's privacy is so different than what I'm seeing on these platforms.
Right. Right. And then, I mean, also for therapists, therapists will report being caught between uh, the algorithm and what the platform wants them to do versus what their license allows them to do. So one of the examples that I've heard of is it wants them to work with clients all across the country. And as therapists, the licensing rules don't allow for that.
Yeah,
That's coming, but it's not in existence at this point. And it will never be. I don't know that it will ever be across all 50 states. You can work with any client in any state.
right.
I think COVID, I think the military has pushed the issue to where it's going to move towards a multi-state license. And those states' legislatures have to opt in to participate in a multi-state license. I don't think states like California or New York are ever going to do that, nor do they need to. They
Right.
have all the clinicians they need, plus with the availability of online, they don't really need other therapists from other states coming in. Plus, they can't regulate those therapists as well.
Yeah.
So there are states that don't have a lot of resources. We sometimes get calls from clients in Idaho or Wyoming or Montana who are looking for CSAT help.
Mhm.
But the way the license currently stands, we would have to be licensed in those states. And, we have to be licensed in the state the therapist is in, as well as the one that the client is in.
Mhm.
So, and with any license comes licensing fees. So the state wants to collect their licensing fees. I don't know exactly how that's going to work with a multi-state license. I don't know if the rate for the license goes up because I think ours are what, a couple $100 every 2 years.
Well, from what I understand, the way that they're going to do that is you still have to hold your home license.
Right. So
Then
ours
you
would be in Utah.
Mhm. And then you will have to pay for a multi-state license. So I think that keeps you from having like they're getting the extra from the multi-state license, but they're also like
You're
the
still
people
paying into your home state.
you're still paying into your home state. But yeah, the crossing state lines has been a huge ethical issue
Hmm.
really since COVID. Before then, we didn't really know what the rules were, and it was really kind of gray, and no one had kind of worked it
Well,
out on,
and a lot of states waived that
yeah,
because of COVID. And so they were waiving the need to be licensed in the state that the client resided because of COVID.
if it was online.
Hmm.
Um, but then we had some big ethical things happen in the country where it became this question of like, if you have reportable stuff, but you are not licensed in that state, does that mean that you're still required to mandate report? Which is ultimately how this became like a nope, you can't cross state lines because where things were happening, the state that they were actually happening in, the therapist wasn't there and was therefore not mandated to report, which
Hmm.
got so gray.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, when you're,
Or for the client, if they're the one reporting, because
Mhm.
normally that's who the state would want to report it is the client.
Right,
Direct information. If another therapist hears this report, I've called and I've reported it, but it's hearsay, which
right,
it is hearsay. So they want to get it as direct to the source as possible, which is the client. Again, if a client called their state licensing board, that therapist isn't licensed in that state.
right.
So then they have to figure out where the therapist is licensed, what the contact info for their state license is. It just adds more steps, meaning clients are less likely to report, even if they should.
Right. And I mean, and then you also have cases of emergency, right? Where we are mandated reporters for
Mm-hmm.
child abuse, for elderly abuse, for suicide ideation, for, thoughts of harming, like intent to harm self or others.
Uh-huh.
Right? And so if we're reporting those things, we're bound by our state law, but not all of those states are equal, right? Like, there are some states that require you to report domestic violence, but we don't have to in the state of Utah, right? Like that's not a reportable thing, but I think it is in California and I think it is in Pennsylvania. Like you have to report domestic violence if you think that it's happening. So,
I wasn't aware of that. I don't think domestic violence is because you've got two adults.
right, but it's considered assault, right? Like so if it is happening, it's one of those things. And I can't remember which states do it, but I remember reading an article about why this is an issue, that what is reportable for each therapist is different state to state,
Hmm.
right? And we have overarching ones that kind of are agreed on federally.
Well, it would be within your licensing organization. So
Mhm.
for social workers, LCSWs, that's NASW, that's the national organization. Marriage and family therapy is AAMFT, something like that. So you have a national credentialing board
Yeah.
who then dictates that. I don't think it's federal. I think it's
Yeah.
according to those organizations that your license is through or your degree is
Right.
through.
And basically what I was saying literally, like reporting intent to harm self or others, that's pretty adopted across all 50 states, right?
Right, right.
But then some of those nuances of what we have to report and ages on that,
Uh-huh.
and that gets sticky. And so if you don't know what your state law is,
Mm-hmm.
or what what that looks like, then again, like you could have not reported something that happened in a state that you needed to report. Yeah, again, like there's an ethical issue with the therapist and the client doesn't know where to report because it's happening on this platform and they don't actually know where that therapist is at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
I mean, their license should be on file and they should only be working with clients who reside in that state that they're licensed in.
yeah,
But again, that's one of the things that people will talk about is that therapists talk about is that they are put in that ethical bind of they might expect that they're only getting clients in the state that they're licensed in, but then they discover that they've been working with a client who resides in a different state and platform just sent them, if you are a match, they will match you regardless of those licensing requirements.
right. Because that's part of the algorithm. The
Uh-huh.
algorithm taking into consideration, like it has to be within the state, which
Yeah.
again comes back to this states like Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota that don't have a lot of mental health practitioners and they get on BetterHelp or these platforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like platforms that are nationally recognized, nationally advertised, ran by like corporate therapy, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which most of them have also been started not by mental health companies. And I think
Right.
that
No, they've been started by big tech companies who
right,
see a benefit to the scalability of this area.
right. And so that like the ethical pieces are not always thought about until there's a huge ethical dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
But
It actually leaves the therapist the one holding the bag. I worked at a place. I do want to just clarify. I quickly did a Google search and it says there are no states that mandate therapists report domestic violence.
okay,
That in the medical field, they are required to report that, but
okay.
not therapists.
Maybe that's where I got it mixed up.
Years ago, I worked at a place, and again, I know my license mandates that I report abuse of a child. And I had a client that had come in with the parent and they reported sexual abuse that had been ongoing. The abuser had left on an LDS mission, was like 1920, something like that, but was starting to, it was the time was getting close for that missionary to return home. And she was like 12. She had trichotillomania where she's pulling out hair. So she had no eyelashes, no eyebrows. again, a lot of anxiety going on, knowing that this cousin of hers was returning in the next 6 months, I think it was. They'd moved recently from Idaho to Utah, and it was an evening session. And I did, I'm a mandated reporter. I have to report that. I'll usually tell clients, I don't not tell them and then report it. I will tell them, I give them the option. Do you want to make that call together? We can, and I did, and I said, we can do that tonight before we leave. And mom and the girl were both like, yeah. And mom had said, we don't know why this hasn't been reported before. We worked with a therapist in Idaho. We told them about what was happening. It's never been reported. And so I just said, I mean, yes, therapists in Idaho would be mandated reporters for this. I don't know why that didn't get reported, but I have to report it. And so we did. We called that night and made the report. And I knew in the back of my head that my supervisor would not be happy with me making that call because it involved a missionary. But I also knew what my license required. And I was right. My supervisor was not happy. They put me in contact with that corporation's attorneys who put a lot of pressure on me to not do that in the future. But again, I knew what my license said. And if something happened and I had not reported and documented that I reported, they would come after me and my license, not the company. I was fully licensed. They didn't hire anybody who wasn't fully licensed. That means I'm aware and I'm the protector of my license, not a company.
Right. And yeah, I think that that's an issue with the platforms for therapists.
Right. Because the therapists are the one being put in the position, but ultimately they're the ones left holding the bag and having to deal with license issues if they cross those ethical boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's the other issue too, right? We as therapists are like, that is some of the safety that you get as a therapist, that if you have a good therapist who is following ethical standards, we tell you session 1, what we have to report and what we don't have to report. And for some people, they want that reported. They don't know how to do that. They don't know how to hold that. And, I think that does get complicated when you have corporations being like, whoa, we don't want to be involved in this. And it's like, well, you're a mental health company.
Right. But their definition, the corporation's definition of confidentiality is a lot broader usually than what we're taught as therapists. Confidentiality means.
Yeah. And I do think that is one of those places that this gets really sticky really fast, these platforms.
Right. Yeah. A couple of the other concerns that are raised under HIPAA compliance is who owns the data? How is this data stored? Some platforms do retain transcripts or the metadata, and therapists don't have access to that, and they don't have control over how that's used or how that is stored. And then often they run into issues where clients, our informed consent is long. I think it's like 13 pages. There's a lot that we go over. And, when I'm working with a new client, there are certain parts of that, like we, send it to them electronically. They sign it electronically. But in that first session, I'm specifically going over parts, limits to confidentiality. Up front, things get worse before they get better. And I'll talk about expectations because really that informed consent is supposed to cover the therapist. But again, if clients don't read, which a lot of people don't read a document that's 13 pages long. Now, because it's electronic, it'll take them to where they need to initial because there's a few places that they have to initial, but that doesn't mean that they've read it.
Right.
So we have to document, I brought their attention to these things, not just they signed it. And that covers me. No, I did talk to them about these particular sections and documented it at the time. And so there's some of that where there is a question around informed consent and whether clients really understand that or know about that.
And what the difference in that is between a therapist and a patient, right? Like,
yeah,
because we I mean, this day and age, we all have cell phones. We're currently recording this over Zoom where like you had to pay the higher tier to get it HIPAA
Mm-hmm.
compliant. They don't use the data. But like one of the things that I do think people should know is that as the therapist, sorry, I don't know why I had a problem with that word therapist. But as the therapist, we own the documents,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we own the file because it's attached to our license. Now, our clients can get access to that. That's not an
Mm-hmm.
issue. But, for therapists who have left our practice and started a private practice or whatever, those files are supposed to go with them
Right. They're
because,
able to export them from the electronic health record that we're now required to use.
right. So, like, we have requirements on HIPAA compliancy and how we store data and what that
Mhm.
looks like. And, like at our practice, we use a platform that is HIPAA compliant that allows us to store our data
Mhm.
appropriately. Yeah. But yeah, it does become a question of like, are they using the metadata? Are they using, because if so, that's not HIPAA compliant.
Mhm.
That
Right.
doesn't stay with the therapist. And even recordings, right? Like that becomes a question then of like, well, where is that out on the platform? Where does that get deleted? How does it get deleted?
Right.
And AI, that's another issue, right? And AI in and of itself, like there's a lot of ethical issues because 99% of all AI material is stolen from other copyrighted stuff,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
like when you're looking at how AI learns and how it creates things, it's having to do that from other material. So like what is if you're using AI for note taking or you're using AI for, different things, like is that open source? Because if it is, it's no longer HIPAA compliant.
Mhm. Well, I think they're saying now that there are forms like Note Taker that they can guarantee the HIPAA compliancy. That's above my level of understanding.
Right.
So
It's
that
just
they are recording the session, they're creating a note, and then that session is deleted and like not maintained in storage.
Mhm.
So AI is also learning when people are putting things into it. They're putting their knowledge into it, which also teaches their particular algorithm that they are using. Yeah, I think that there can be HIPAA compliant ways. I know therapists are using AI note taker mainly because note taking is the part of it's not the
right,
part of the job that you love if you're a
right.
therapist. It's a part that's necessary, but it's not a part that you love.
Right. And I want to be clear. Yeah, I do believe that there are programs out there that are HIPAA compliant. My question
Mhm.
is like, how do you know that? Right.
Right, right.
Especially on these platforms that have already had
Hmm.
issues with HIPAA compliancy.
Right.
Um, like where are they shoring that up? And what
Hmm.
is,
Right, right,
which again are not things that clients are thinking about, right? Those are
right.
things that therapists are having to think about
Hmm. If they're aware.
if they're aware. Yeah.
Um, some clients also report there's mixed reviews on whether these platforms and the services that they offer are helpful or that they're helpful to an extent. Sometimes clients report feeling like a number. There can be inconsistent care where sometimes the algorithm allows for overbooking, which that shouldn't be happening. But I know with some of those platforms, they are offering a 30-minute session versus a 50 to 60-minute session. And so I can see how that automated booking gets complicated quickly, and isn't always accurate. There's not usually the ability to work with more complex mental health issues. So complex PTSD or severe mental health issues or addiction issues. It's known that these platforms are not really beneficial to clients who need a tailored, specialized niche approach.
Mhm.
You're going to find those therapists in the traditional group practices, private practices. Also, the therapeutic approach they often report is hit or miss, whether they feel like they were well matched with the therapist.
Yeah.
So, those are some of the issues over the quality and continuity. You also have therapists coming onto the platform and leaving the platform more regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense to me in terms of like turnover rates and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
how the therapeutic, and I think this is the thing, this is also, one of those things that we know that the rapport that you have with the client is the most important part of the therapeutic process. It's not the theory. It's not what you're teaching them. It's this interpersonal connection.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's how
which,
you show up in the room or online in the session with that client,
yeah,
and how you're distilling the knowledge you have without the client necessarily being aware that you're giving them a theoretical approach.
right. And so if that's not happening, or if it's making it hard for that to happen, for turnover and then matching with a new therapist, like
Mm-hmm.
it's really not taking into consideration that rapport building that is crucial for good
Mm-hmm.
therapy.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the concerns professionals have in the field with these platforms, is that it can feel like it's commodification of our industry, of the work that we do, reducing it to a more automated transactional approach instead of actually the art of being a therapist, being able to, as we've talked about, show up interpersonally and attune to the client and move them from an attuned, attached, integrated place. That's actually how we know. There's research that says that's actually how clients improve, is through that type of approach with a therapist. And so when these platforms are commodifying it or capitalizing on the field, overall it feels like it reduces the appreciation for good therapists. It reduces the art of therapy, and again just makes clients, or requires clinicians to work harder to just get decent pay. And that's already somewhat of an issue. I mean, if you work in county mental health, I started out in county mental health. My caseload was like 90 something per week. There's a lot of no-show rates. I'm not seeing 95 clients a week, but I might see 30 clients a week, which was a lot. And so, yeah, there's the level of work that you're going to get at county mental health. I think there were some great therapists that I worked with and that I trained under and had great experience with, and learned a lot of valuable things as a new therapist in the field, even though that's somewhat of a platform where community mental health is not usually where you're going to get the best services either.
Right. Because of overworking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a really interesting point, not the commodification piece, like, because I do think this is something that we are seeing across the board. The board is the devaluing of like human, like what it costs to have a human in
Mm-hmm.
at any
Right.
point, right? And I I think we have to be careful in doing that in so many fields, but especially in the health and mental health field, because we are we're devaluing the thing that actually works,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Human beings are complex. We talk about this all the time. And to reduce it to something that is so oversimplified, that and really oversimplifies what the therapist is doing, I think is a huge problem, because it takes a lot to be a really good therapist.
Yeah. I've done, in the past couple of months, I've done a podcast on primary and secondary emotions, as well as first order and second order change. I feel like with a lot of these platforms, or even the practices that are run largely by insurance, um, we're dealing with secondary emotions and first order change,
Mhm.
which is always going to be temporary because that's not actually what's going on. The other thing I did want to say is most of these, I think I mentioned this, but most of the sessions are 30-minute sessions.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about affordability to clients and they're paying per week, but getting a live session that's 30 minutes, we're actually cutting out some of what we know. And, in those podcasts that I talked about, therapy is not just simply transferring knowledge to clients.
Right.
clients can read these books. They are reading these books. They are listening to some of the same podcasts I'm listening to.
Right.
Like if it's only about giving them knowledge, then yeah, we can be replaced. And there are times I will say to clients, or I've had clients who use AI and tell me they use AI. There are times I've recommended clients go to ChatGPT. It's not the kind of work. This is just some book learning that they can get that is beneficial and supplemental to the work we're doing in session. It's not the work we're doing in session.
Right.
But it can serve a purpose. And I've had clients text me and say, hey, thanks. This has been very helpful to ask ChatGPT some of these things and get the information back. That's great. They're not stopping therapy. They're not saying, I don't have a need for what we're doing, but it's supplemental to the work that we're doing, which is that interpersonal, second order, primary emotions, and healing.
Yeah. And again, like this is an empathy thing. This is a human to human thing. And the other thing that I was thinking about when you're talking about commodification is how many clients I have seen who have had bad therapists, and how much harder I have to work to get them to trust me, to trust the process, to trust themselves. Right. And if that's what's happening on the platforms, how many people are we driving away from therapy ever? Because this is a bad experience. Right. And we're calling it therapy.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a lot of damage, right? And again, as a social worker, one of our mandates is do no harm. And so if the platform itself is not set up to create human connection in a way that is healing and can create more disconnection, then that's a problem.
Well, and I mean, I've been surprised because we do pay for marketing. We pay monthly for our marketing. I'm never going to be able to compete with a corporate marketing budget.
Right.
Sometimes we'll get clients who will say, how long have you been in business? And I'll tell them and they'll say, why didn't I know about you sooner? I don't know. I don't think a lot of therapists are doing a lot of marketing. And I don't know. We are marketing. We've always been marketing. We don't just put our stuff on Psychology Today like every other therapist in the country. But I only have so much money available for a marketing budget.
Right.
And yeah, sometimes it is. We're working harder to earn their trust because the last therapist did a lot of damage.
Right.
Or the last therapist was not specialized in the work that we do. And so we're having to help them unlearn, which they were impressionable. They were vulnerable when they were working with that therapist. And so that therapist said some things that they grabbed onto that I'm like, oh no, that doesn't work. You're actually not in control as a partner of their sobriety or recovery. Right. You can't control it. They want to believe they can.
Right.
And so it's that dance of trying to get them to unlearn something that they wanted to hear that a therapist gave to them.
Yeah.
That isn't actually beneficial and won't work in the long run.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, to me, I'm always like, there are probably some therapists who should be afraid of some of these platforms. If that's the type of work they're doing, I think one of the pros for therapists is they're not having to pay for marketing. They're not really having to compete a lot for clients.
Right.
Which, okay, yeah, that's part of it. At some level, you should be able to compete for clients. You should be building your brand recognition and based on the quality of work that you're known to do and not just $1 million marketing budget.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's flawed. And I think that I can appreciate the principle of getting access to mental health to people who wouldn't have access otherwise. I appreciate that.
Right.
I don't know that that is what this is doing.
Right.
And I don't think it is that altruistic in why they do what they do.
But it can shift clients' expectations of what therapy is.
Yeah.
Which then, when they're working with us, they can be a little more impatient
Mm-hmm.
with the time that it's taking for some things to shift. They might have unrealistic expectations of what therapy is
Mm-hmm.
and what those deep, in-depth relational models require. And
Yeah.
so it can feel to them like it's moving slow. Sometimes I will say though, okay, yes, I understand these things moved fast with these platforms, but you're not on a platform. Why? Why
Right.
did you come to see me? I'm not on the platform. You sought me out, or you sought our practice out if I'm on an intake call.
And sometimes we have to give them the opportunity to see that, to digest that.
Uh-huh. Right.
Like, oh yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, I do think I think that that is the harder part. I struggle less with having to, no, that's not true. I was going to say, I think I struggle less with having to undo that and deal with that than I do the people who will never come into therapy altogether. But it is just as frustrating to have to heal things that were not good for the client. They know that it wasn't good for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet on some level, they still hold that as truth because a therapist said it.
Right. Right. And they may have unrealistic expectations of what therapy costs. It's true. Therapy is cost intensive.
Mhm.
And if you don't have, like, some therapists flat out refuse to work with insurance companies, which I get. Some there are some insurance companies that I absolutely refuse to work with.
Right.
And part of that is because they reimburse really low. They reimburse lower than I actually pay therapists. So
Mhm.
I would be losing money or paying the therapist really low rates that then they need to see another client to even make the amount they're wanting to. But also with some insurance companies, there's a lot of micromanaging, which I think these platforms, therapists will also report there's a lot of micromanaging, and often the therapist's best judgment is overridden in favor of corporate policies, in favor of corporate decisions
Mhm.
and what's best for bottom line versus the client that is being served. And so that's also a complicating factor.
Right.
And I've where I was a provider with some of these insurance companies who I had to do a phone call with every 6 to 7 weeks of ongoing care. They'd want to know, why is the client still coming? Have they made any progress? How soon will they be done? And I have always worked on in-depth
Mhm.
or long-term issues. And so they're saying, will they be done in the next 6 weeks? No, I can't get them done in 12 weeks. And often I'm not even talking to a therapist. And so there are times where I get very frustrated, like, why am I trying to explain to you, who you're not a therapist? You don't understand what I'm talking about. You're calling because that's your job with this company. But you get to make a decision about my care for
Right.
my client. And that's just one of the things that when I opened a group practice, I was like, I will not work with these insurance companies because I don't like being put in a position where their company policy as an insurance company overrides my clinical judgment.
Right. Yeah. And anytime that happens, like that's problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So the last thing is, there's often not, like, the therapists on these platforms can say that they are specialized. And even if they were, do you have the bandwidth in a 30-minute session
Right.
to do what you're certified to do? Like, I would question that. Even
I
if
mean,
you are certified, is 30 minutes a week really the amount of time necessary to do what you're trained to do?
I mean, in knowing what my training is and knowing how I'm not. I
Mhm.
couldn't get that down to 30 minutes and do something
I
effective.
can barely get it in 50 minutes.
Right.
Usually, like at 40, 20 minutes to the hour, we're finally going somewhere deep. And I take it right up to the hour.
Right.
I'm like, this is valuable space that we finally gotten to. I don't want to wrap up things right now.
Right. But it takes us that time to like walk down those
Hmm.
steps, right? And
Right.
if you're 30 minutes, you're not getting deep.
No, no. So you're not creating secondary change. We're
Yeah.
not really spending time getting to the primary emotions,
Right.
which we
Right.
know is where therapy is beneficial.
Mhm.
That's when things lead to lasting change instead of a band-aid kind of crisis work, put them together, send them out, and repeat
Mhm.
every week.
Which again, if you have 30 minutes and you're trying to do that, it takes away some of that relational piece, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I usually spend about 5 minutes at the beginning of session getting to know where they're at on the week, what's interesting them, what's not, right? On a human level. But if you
Mm-hmm.
only have 30 minutes, you're just it would feel to me a lot like when I go to the doctor's office and I have 15 minutes to explain what is happening and then they give me medicine and I'm like, okay, but there's like 15 other things that this could be. And if you would check
Mm-hmm.
these things and spend a little bit more time with me, it might be more accurate and I won't be here in a week.
Right. I mean, the last thing I will say is I think these kinds of platforms are able to thrive in our country because of the way our healthcare system is set up.
Mhm.
It's not set up for preventative care. It's not set up to go to the level that's needed
Right.
in terms of the work that needs to be done. It's more set up for quick in, out, treat on the surface and keep going.
Right. There's a problem. There's a wound. Here's a
Mm-hmm.
Band-Aid. See you next week.
And it's also not everybody gets the same access to healthcare. It's based on if you have insurance and what insurance you could afford or what insurance your company is willing to offer. Because there are some really bad plans out there that
Yeah.
don't cover much except emergencies. And even in emergencies or crises, they have a maximum
Yeah.
that they'll cover.
Right. Which again, like, yes, there are not all insurance is created equal. Our health system isn't preventative.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a lot of triage that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think that's true in the mental health capacity too,
Yeah.
right? Like
I
a
think
lot of
we're seeing that try to shift to that same type of treatment, which it's not really helpful at the medical level. Why would it be healthy at the mental health level?
right.
Yeah. All right. Any wrap up thoughts that you have as we talked about these platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is if you're really seeking treatment, if you want help, there are plenty of therapists who are not on these platforms who will work with you,
Mm-hmm.
who can and see you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
They don't see you as a number, and I think that is worth it.
Right.
And so I would say spend the time, do the homework, and find a therapist that works for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And again, the sticker price might be a little bit higher, but when you add up what you're paying weekly for a 30-minute session, I think it's not going to be a lot more expensive to pay for a therapist. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there is something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.